All right, we are here with the opening statements, the beginning of the retrial of Stewart, Scott Drexler, Ricky Lovelien, and Andrea Parker. Today we started the day. First started out with Mr. Marchese for Parker objecting to the makeup of the jury. At the end of jury selection, the judge took away 5 of the strikes of the defendants and put those people back on the jury, and he wanted to make it on the record that he was objecting to the makeup of that jury. He also wanted to object to the fact that there was 36 slides the government was going to use. I believe this Tanasi was objecting to a slideshow because no evidence has been entered at this time. At that time, the judge says the exhibits have always been used during opening statements, and is there something in particular you're objecting to? She does not rule, and she lets the government use their 36 slides as evidence. Judge says we don't know what is going to be entered or who will be available and who won't. So that's what he's objecting to, all of this evidence coming in. It was denied. Then the government objects to one picture of the stacked formation of the Park Service that we know from last trial, ruling that it shows law enforcement in the wash. He says he understands the motion in preliminary and he did not intend to break it. The judge says, so your client is going to testify? She is using this to try to see if Stewart is going to testify. He said, at this time I do not need to say. It could come in another way, and if it does not come in, then he has to live with the fact that he said something in his opening statement that was not entered into evidence. The government is, we are going into BLM conduct and law enforcement conduct. That's part of the motion. And he is also talking about a state of mind. They are raising the issue of BLM conduct, and he's objecting to this. Judge says it goes to a self-defense, and that they were able to possibly get a self-defense jury instruction in, and he is saying that that this goes to their self-defense, and they are going to be entering evidence to prove that. The judge says self-defense does not include agents of law enforcement. It is not relevant, and there is no evidence of extreme force that was used by the agents. Of course, there's no evidence entered at all at this time, so obviously there's no evidence, but she's saying that there's no evidence even from last trial. Judge says this is what we are trying to show depicts what was actually happening in the wash, and they are entering an evidence, just a picture of what was going on in the wash. They are not changing it in any way, shape, or form. It is just purely evidence. The judge says it is not a legal defense, and what you are arguing is jury nullification. Tanasi argues that for a minute, and judge says, I know the facts of this case. I was here last time. This is not a legal defense. She gives an example. If the government, if the banks are going under, they're closing down, they're foreclosing on friends or something, and a gentleman goes in and he pulls a gun on and starts to rob a bank, and a security guard points a gun at him, and he points a gun at that back at that security guard. That is not self-defense. If you want to argue the facts, then argue the facts. This is not a legal defense here. So we're done with this from the judge's mouth. In the jury, you can now bring the jury in, and you cannot use the picture. Then we go to the government's opening statement. He talks a lot about that this case deals with April 12, 2014 and not much else. That the charges from this case stem from the 12th of 2014. In fact, they stem from 40 minutes between 12 and 12:40 and the actions of these gentlemen on the wash and their actions alone. Not anything else. They're trying to prove that you can't bring up what the BLM was doing. You can't bring up what was going on beforehand. All that this case and these charges stem from is these defendants' actions, not the BLM actions. That's a huge part of this. He said that these gentlemen went on a bridge and threatened to shoot law enforcement officers. They proved they were willing to shoot them to get the officers to stop. They traveled to intimidate officers, and law enforcement officers were made to back down. They went through all of the charges and explained how the defendants pointing guns, Eric and Scott, brandishing Stephen Stewart, going through pictures during all of this, just merely carrying a weapon, pointing to Ricky Lovelien. It's not exactly what they did, but it's the mindset behind the gun, the mindset of the person wielding the gun. Now, what is going on here? The defense has already been prohibited from talking about their state of mind, yet the government, in their opening statement, is going to talk about the defendant's state of mind. How is that legal that the defense can't talk about their state of mind, yet the government, in their opening statement, is talking only about the state of mind? Once again, they said it's the mindset behind the gun, the mindset of the person holding the gun. Yet the defense is prohibited from talking about the mindset and their intentions.
Susan DeLumis says, then why was my husband charged at all? It's a very good question.
On the 12th. That's interesting. You know, maybe this is something
you
can put into that.
Apologies, but I thought that was
Then they go through and explain the charges and how these charges affect these guys, and trying to pinpoint items, showing pictures of exactly when they obstructed justice, showing force and violence against law enforcement, showing that they're willing to work together and to conspire together to stop the law enforcement officers. They also said to be in a conspiracy, you merely need a wink and a nod. There does not need to be an agreement. There does not even need to be a verbal agreement. Just a wink and a nod. Just knowing what you're doing and possibly just being there as support for other people is entering into a conspiracy. They talked a lot about Ryan Payne and MOA. They talked about him using the Bundy Ranch as a platform to build his militia and to move against the federal government that he has always wanted to do. They brought Ryan Payne as pretty much the leader of the conspiracy, and almost Cliven Bundy as a victim being used by Ryan Payne and the militias. The group is he's using the group to use force and violence against the government, and Bundy was just a way for him to do this. They were acting on another matter entirely. They talk a lot about Ryan and Bundy and his involvement, but then they mentioned that Ryan Payne has small interactions with Richard Lovelien, that Richard Lovelien communicates with Ryan Payne and then shares his calls for at arms, and that's what puts Ricky Lovelien in as a leader. He breaks his speech, his opening statement, into what the before. That's what he just went through, everything that happened before the 12th. Then he breaks it down into the 12th. How these gentlemen got into a vehicle, traveled down. They got to the encampment. They decided to go with camping with the militia. They call themselves militia, even though they weren't actually militia at the time. They're really pushing this. They got into a vehicle with Richard Lovelien. Even if they didn't know him, they were conspiring together because they rode down to the speech together. They rode down to the wash together. Even though in the last trial it was brought up because there was parking issues is why they did that. And they didn't actually know each other or even each other's names until they were arrested together.
Susan wants to know, why aren't they talking about Stewart Rhodes? He's the one who put out the big call.
Because they're using Ryan Payne's interview with Longbow as the basis for the entire indictment. They talk about the calling to support, trying to separate. They're using words. It's a play on words inside. They're trying to separate protesters from people with guns. Apparently, if you bring a gun, you are no longer a protester. You are now a militia, and militias cannot protest. That is what they're trying to play with words inside. Protesters are people who came with signs. Militia, people that came with guns. They talked about the rally on at the side of the ranch, 5 miles from the ICP. Then they go in to talk about the fact that the BLM went to set up, here's another play with words, a police station, a makeshift temporary police station. Since when is BLM police officers? I would have liked to see the actual police officers. If they're supposed to be arresting protesters, they should be arrested by police officers, not by BLM agents. Why are the BLM policing themselves? Isn't that what should have happened? If BLM are there rounding up cattle and they're protesters, should police not be the one in between the protesters and the BLM? They talked about how the sheriff decided to get involved. He said emotions mixed with guns is never a good mixture. He talks about his speech that he made, that he came to talk to Cliven privately, and Cliven, being encouraged by the amount of support and the group of the people, wouldn't meet privately with the sheriff, and he made the sheriff speak on the stage. At that point, the sheriff started his speech with, he has come here to put an effort to make a emotional situation safe. He talks about the BLM and their operations being ceased, and that they were removing their assets, and then he was asked about the cattle, and he says that that's what they need to talk about. Then he goes to say that Cliven then got on stage and amped up the crowd, creating a mass of emotional people ready to go down and take the cattle back. He also calls for the sheriff to disarm the BLM and the Park Service and take down the pay stations at Meade and Red Rock. He gives him an hour, and then as the sheriff's leaving, the people are all shouting at him, the crowd's shouting at him, do your job. They make it seem like the people were against the sheriff in the speech, even though in the video we all know that they were cheering him on and glad that he came. Then he goes in that hundreds of supporters let the defendants got into the truck and got down to the wash. Well, I came to He's rambling on and doing the entire last trial in a step-by-step motion. He talks about Metro already previously having a support station set up to be able to fastly respond to the wash, even though it wasn't a pre-planned situation. He talks about the skirmish line, really pushing it to the jury that these law enforcement, the BLM, the Metro, they were all working together, when we know that the BLM and the sheriff weren't exactly working together before this, and that the sheriff and the Metro were getting involved because the BLM was aggressing the situation. But we're not allowed to talk about that. The defense is not allowed to bring up the actions of the BLM agents or even the Metro and Highway Patrol.
And can we tell the audience why again? Is that a relevancy issue or redundancy issue?
It was the government's motion, and he claims that it goes to jury nullification, and that these charges are the people on trial are the defendants and not the BLM. Of course they're not the BLM. Look at Lovelien. He was shot. We have finally one officer being indicted on this, and still he's not even being held. And these men have been held for over 17 months.
Wow.
And they went through a trial with a hung jury, and I think the worst was a 7-4 for acquittal, and we're going through this. Two of the defendants, I'm gonna wait.
Yeah. Come on, Brian.
Two of the defendants were actually 10-2 for acquittal. They really pushed the fact that these men were trying to go against the government with force. They used the force, scary intimidation. Just mere fact that you bring your weapon, you don't have to brandish it. You don't even have to point it. If you bring your weapon to this protest, you are going against the law. They break down all of the charges. Conspiracy does not need to be a written agreement, just a wink and a nod. There was an objection to this, and the judge said it was overruled because it was a correct interpretation of the law. Even though we're not even to speak of any type of interpretation of the law, that's how they're getting around us even mentioning the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, or the Constitution, because it goes to a state of law. And yet, here is the first time I've ever seen the judge say, well, it's an appropriate stating of the law. So the Constitution is not an appropriate stating of the law. Mentioning the First or Second Amendment or freedom of speech is not an appropriate stating of the law, but him saying that with a wink and a nod you can join a conspiracy is an appropriate statement of the law. Then they really hit Ricky Lovelien hard in his opening statement. That's because they have absolutely no evidence against him. They are stating because he saw Ryan Payne call to arms, he shared it, and that he asked where to go as he was traveling down, then that makes him a leader. That he got on the bridge, he had his rifle in a sling and never took it off of his shoulder the entire time. He was on the bridge after the fact, not even during. He never went into the wash, but just that he went to the bridge and made a phone call makes him the leader. Also the fact that Steve, Scott, and Eric got into his vehicle road to the first speech where the sheriffs talked, and then down to the wash, that makes Ricky a leader. They hit him really hard in opening statements. Then we go into Perez's opening statement. What I feel like they're trying to do here is they're trying to separate people out. You know, we have two different groups. We have our three guys from Idaho and Ricky from Montana. They're trying to separate and destroy here. The government is trying to separate Ricky from the rest of them, and the lawyers are even kind of working into it a little bit. I believe this goes to the fact that Perez can't get up and argue something for Steve and Eric and Ricky and Scott, but Tanasi can get up and show pictures and have Steve, Eric, and Scott all on there because they traveled together and that their case is pretty much similar.
Trying to keep them together.
Perez, you know, all of their opening statements, they explain that opening statements are not evidence, and that they kind of take what the government has said. You know, he says 400 give or take people, not thousands of protesters. Then no shots were fired, not even a rock was thrown, and no one was arrested that day. They all went home. That on April 11th, there was a decision made that the BLM was going to cease their operations. Yet the Metro and all of these officers...
We love him.
Yet Metro and all of these officers had set up stations all around the ICP, the police command center, which was the BLM command center, not police station. Play on words again. They're trying to use propaganda to confuse the jury here. That they were put there, they're using militia, once again a dirty word, right? The militia.
And they make it derogatory in their context. Okay,
absolutely. Yeah. He said the purpose of the militia is not to create violence, but to prevent it. That is what all of these guys have said in their defense the entire time.
So
they tried to say in the government's opening statements, they tried to say Eric Parker had decided 6 months prior that he was coming down to stand against the federal government because he was fed up. Yeah, he was fed up, all right. He was fed up with the state of affairs in our government and the way that the people and our rights are being trampled upon. The Constitution, the First Amendment, Second Amendment. They can't even bring up the First Amendment zone. The true reason that Eric Parker, Scott Drexler, and Stewart went to Nevada, we're not allowed to bring up in the courtroom. So with taking that piece of the puzzle out, they're trying to make it look like these men got into a truck to go down and face the federal government in an armed standoff, when actually they went down to prevent people from being abused, thrown to the ground, and had attack dogs sicked on them while they're protesting on the side of the road from BLM agents.
And let's remember, the nation had the opportunity to watch that. This is what they were seeing on video. This is the evidence of the aggressors attacking innocent people. So they see this from a distance, and they feel the need to go in hopes maybe safety in numbers peacefully would stop the aggressors with people viewing them and watching them. You know, I mean, they're making other assumptions that they went for different reasons. But how about the purpose that most people go because we go in safety in numbers and it stops the aggressors just by showing up?
Well, I feel like what they're doing here is what they tried to do in the first Oregon trial. They are preventing the defense. They said, well, last time we went in and we knew they were going to go against the hard, how the BLM came at it. So instead, the government was like, well, this is why the BLM had to come so hard at it. They tried to make excuses for everyone. They brought in the dark humor. Instead of in Oregon, when they tried to hide everything and it slowly came out in court, it didn't work out for them. So now they're backtracking because the last trial didn't work out for them either. They showed all their cards in the beginning and they tried to make light of it. And then the defense came back even harder and they said, not only did they say they did this, this is why they did this, and here's better pictures. And then every civilian person that testified for the government had the exact same story as the defense. So here, they're changing tactics. They're going back to the government's tactic in Oregon of keeping it all out. So how can the government go in and start immediately talking about their state of mind behind the gun? The mindset of the person behind the gun is the crime here. Yet, we can't bring up the mindset. So how are we supposed to defend ourselves from that? They are trying to prevent all evidence of any wrongdoing by the BLM, the Park Service, even law enforcement officials that came, even though the law enforcement officials like the Metro and them really didn't do anything wrong. So it was mostly the BLM and the Park Service. But
mistreated people earlier on.
Earlier on, whatever
there,
conspiracy, because there is a conspiracy here. There's a conspiracy with the BLM and the Park Service against Cliven Bundy and against the federal people. They want to take away your First Amendment. They want to take away your Second Amendment. Why else would they put a zone so far away from operations? Say, yeah, you want to protest? All right, people, protest from that little box over there, and you can't see what we're doing. And we don't have to worry about you reporting the truth. Just like in here, they're trying to keep the truth out of the courtroom, and how are we going to get a fair trial? Then Tanasi went up. He's Stephen Stewart's lawyer. His opening statement was amazing. He's still fighting very hard. There was a plan to protest, a plan to stand up to the federal government. They had weapons, and they are not charged for simply having weapons because it is not illegal. On April 11th, the BLM were ceasing operations, and that is before Eric Stephen Scott even got into their car and got down there. He believed that the ops was over and he was going to watch the cows come home. Free cows coming through the wash, coming back to the ranch in celebration. What they got when they got there, what they saw was BLM and Park Service dressed like military. Dressed like military. Immediately that was objected to, and of course the government's objections get sustained and they had to move on. This is not a new concept. This is how our country was founded. And then they go in to talk about the original formation of our country and how it was formed by protesting against forces that are trying to take away our rights, take away the rights of civilians, all in the name of big business and money.
And maybe some minerals, some oil. There's a lot of different layers to this, but it's not the benefit of we the people,
Yeah, exactly.
Right. None of it's for the benefit of we the people,
I'll tell you what.
Representation without content. All right.
So, hold on. Do you mind if I just ask you a couple questions about the connection with your husband today? I mean, it was great to be able to see you guys make eye contact. I know it's a little challenging in a circumstance like this to really have a connection with someone, but he's in good spirits. I mean, all the defense attorneys feel like they're clicking like a team there. All of the defendants are in good spirits, and that there's this huge crowd supporting them in the courtroom is huge. What was that like for you?
I definitely saw that, we're going into this, we've got, everything is stacked against us. But the support in the courtroom, that it gives the lawyers
and the
confidence.
Jury.
It shows a lot for the jury. It also takes away the confidence of the prosecution. As we're sitting in the courtroom, all I see is them staring at me and the people sitting in the pews. We have some high-named people inside. We have Adam Kokesh has come inside. He's sitting there. So obviously, all of the defendants are looking out and they're saying, this is amazing. This is support for me. People care about this. They are not just going to let the government railroad us. So that is huge. And it also puts more restraints on the judge and what she can do on the inside, although she has shown today with not moving anything for the defense, and everything that the government wants, the government gets, including that absurd motion. If you haven't seen that motion, go and read it. The arrogance in that motion is absurd if you read through it, and the way I understand it, if the prosecution starts to bring up state of mind, that opens the defense to bring up state of mind. So why write that motion and then immediately in opening statements start bringing up state of mind? A lot of this I don't understand. Maybe he was thrown off by the fact that so many people were inside the courtroom. There was a lot of media inside the courtroom. This is something we haven't seen before. The only time the courtroom was that full was last trial, was when Eric Parker himself was on the stand. We have our entire side filled up, part of the other side filled up. The entire courtroom is full.
Can we tell the audience really quick, too, what the motion keywords are for that search for those that are just joining us? With all these new people and supporters here, we have new audiences.
Yes, please.
So the keywords for that motion, I can't remember. I did read it. The one that you were just referring to in regards to the statement of mind.
Keywords.
We all have it.
I know it goes to the state of, they don't want them to be talking about, I don't know what that is. Hold on.
Andrew, for
this is
my audience here, could you tell people how to find you?
Absolutely. I'm on Facebook as Andrea Parker. I also have a page, Guilty Until Proven Innocent. I do live streams from the courthouse every single day. You can also find that motion on It Matters How You Stand website.
There you go.
Also, you can find it on the Idaho Political Prisoners Foundation.
And it's not too far down, guys. So when you go to It Matters How You Stand website, it is not that far down. But you know what's even better? As you're going to see a whole lot of other motions that are not being discussed right now today at this moment. So if you're new to this case and you want to understand it better, definitely go to It Matters How It Stands to find out exactly all the details by document.
It Matters How You Stand on Facebook, and also the Idaho Political Prisoners Foundation.
Yes.
They both post all of those motions. If you can take the time, it's hard to get through and read some of it. They actually take Eric Parker's testimony from the first trial, break it down in little segments, and talk about how his own testimony goes to jury nullification and is not a legal defense. They are saying self-defense and defense of others here is not a legal defense. Even though Eric Parker was standing on the bridge, he stood on the bridge as BLM agents said over the loudspeaker, we are going to use non-lethal force on you. We are going to send pepper gas into the crowd. The crowd continued. He did not get down. Not until they announced over the loudspeaker they were now authorized to use deadly force, lethal force on the people. He knew he had snipers aimed at him. He got down to defend himself and the innocent men, women, and children down in the wash that he believed were about to be slaughtered like they did at Ruby Ridge. And they were not allowed to speak of any of this. But this is exactly how our government has been working under the eyes of we the people for a long time, and we're not going to take it anymore.
Amen, sister.
Hey, can I join you for one
Absolutely.
comment here? Because I want to say something to the people who are on your live stream as well here. You know, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Adam Kokesh. I've been to jail for civil disobedience. I've been arrested a few dozen times, did 4 months once. Nothing compared to what these gentlemen are going through right now. 17 months now.
17
for Eric.
months. It's going on almost 18 months here.
It really is absurd, but I gotta say it's beautiful to see that there's so many strong women and other people who haven't been arrested standing outside with them, the family members, the wives, you know, ride or die. It's really amazing to see the kind of commitment and the family support that's around this case. So I hope you'll join all these brave women out here who are standing to support their men who are in jail. Share these videos, do what you can to spread the message. What else would you like people to do in support right now?
You can write everyone letters. I will repost it on my page. Hearing from people outside, that gives them spirit. We're going to have some bad days in court. Things are, you know, they're going to try to paint this horrible picture. And for these guys to go back and get letters of support from people is huge for them. For them to have people sitting in the courtroom, this is huge for them. It keeps them lifted in these times when we are being railroaded. And it shows them that we the people are not forgetting about them. We are not going to let this just be swept under the rug like the government wants it.
Thank you, Adam.
It's true. Like, that kind of support makes a huge difference. You know, like I said, I did a really small amount of time.